Hello my lovelies! My name is Gilbert Dolthalion and the plan for today is to talk about trimming and clipping your seams. These techniques involve clipping away some material from your seam after it's been sewn, which can seem scary at first but will make a huge difference to the finished garment. There are two main reasons for this technique: to reduce bulk and to release the tension on your seam so that your fabric lies nicely. And they're a basic step in many other techniques. This technique doesn't involve any special equipment, just what you're sewing, your scissors, and an iron to press your seam afterwards as normal. First, let's cover trimming straight seams. Here's a very basic straight seam, sewn but not pressed. When I was starting out, I found it easier to work with press seams because it helps to control the fabric and keep it out of the way of the scissors. But this is only really true for straight seams, and one of the reasons for reducing the bulk is that the seam can impress itself onto the front of the fabric when you press it. For this seam, all I'm going to do is to take my scissors and cut the excess back to as close to the seam allowance as I feel comfortable with, given the fabric and the finishing technique. So for example, if I was going to finish the seam with a zigzag stitch, I would leave about 1 centimetre. If I wanted to fell the seam, I would only trim one side or both sides and then one side again, so that I could wrap the longer one around the excess of the other. If I was going to put this for a serger, I wouldn't trim it at all, because the serger does that for me. And that's this seam done. Now it just needs to be pressed and then finished. The next step up from that is corners, which come in two forms. One's pointing inside and one's pointing outside. If you have a corner that points out, you need to reduce the bulk so it will form a nice point. So simply clip off the seam on an angle, getting as close to the seam as you can. With that done, you should be able to turn it around relatively easily, gently pushing it out. You can see here the difference between a corner with the seam clipped and one without. For corners turned inwards, we're starting to cover clipping as opposed to trimming. Trimming can be used in conjunction with clipping, but here we're not just reducing the bulk, but also reducing the tension where a seam sewn creates a seam excess that is smaller than the seam itself. This means that the excess is pulling on the seam, pulling it out of shape. So here we need to cut the excess open with a cut horizontally through the excess, right into the corner. For clipping corners especially, I would recommend using sharp thread scissors because they have a finer point and will give you better control over where you're cutting. Once again, be careful not to go through the seam. But with that done, it should turn out nicely, giving you a smooth corner like this, rather than unclipped like this. The other place that clipping is vital is on curved seams like neck and armholes. These cause the same problem. The seam excess is smaller than the seam, pulling it out of shape. So again, I'm just going to clip horizontally along the seam to release that tension. The amount of cuts really depends on how big the curve is. Bigger, more extreme curves need more clips than the shallow ones, but you really can't do too many, as long as your fabric doesn't disintegrate. Some people like to cut little triangles, but I haven't found that this makes much of a difference. If you have an extreme curve and it's still not lying flat, that's probably the time to try this, because obviously it takes more material out of the seam allowance. And once I turn it out and press it, you can see the difference between this side and the other, where this was clipped and this was not. So that's trimming and clipping seams. The two pieces of advice that I want to give you may sound contradictory, but bear with me. The first is that if in doubt, cut away more. This is especially true if you're clipping on a curved seam or on a corner. The more you cut away, the nicer it will lay. However, on the other hand, you need to be aware of how much you're trimming away, where your seam is, and how much your fabric will fray. Even though you want your seam to lie nicely, it cannot come at the loss of the seam itself. In particular, really be careful not to accidentally clip through the seam itself. So with the combination of these two, my combined tip is to take it a little at a time. Trim a little, flip it over, check how it's doing, and then flip it back and trim a little more, and repeat that until you've got it where you want it to be. As you grow in experience, you'll get a lot more confident about how much you can trim away on that first step, so there'll be less repetition. And in the end, you'll end up with some lovely, beautifully lying seams. As usual, let me know if there's anything you think I could have covered better, or if you have any requests or suggestions for future entries. I want to make these as clear and as useful as I can, so the more information I get from you guys, the better I can make them going forward. Thank you for watching, and if you did find it useful or enjoyable, please think about giving me a like and subscribing if you're not already for more costume and sewing related content. Thank you to everyone who is already subscribed, and please continue to look after yourselves and be sensible, and I shall see you again soon. Bye!